I remember the day everything changed with a clarity that still sends shivers down my spine. It began like any typical afternoon, soaked in the gentle light of early fall. The leaves outside my window danced in the soft breeze, their rustling a peaceful soundtrack to a day I had believed would be unremarkable. I had no notion that the frail links of friendship and love would soon break into 1,000 fragments. I was seated in my favorite area of the neighborhood cafe, the one with the faded red seats and the perfume of fresh coffee that always seemed to relax me. I observed as people flowed in and out of the cafe, oblivious of the storm that was about to descend upon my life. It was in that same moment that I observed Lily, my best friend, engaged in a whispered conversation with Jake, my lover. Their body language was lighthearted, yet there was something odd. Lily's eyes gleamed with a secret delight, and Jake's smile contained an edge of mischief I hadn't seen before. As I sipped my coffee, my fingers trembled ever so slightly, a subtle hint that something was off. At first, I brushed off that unsettling feeling as mere oversensitivity. After all, I had always trusted them implicitly. Yet, as the day carried on, those small moments, a lingering glance between them, the mischievous half-smile that slipped over Lily's face when she thought I wasn't looking, started to create a pattern. I began to wonder if I was misinterpreting innocent conversation for anything worse. Deep down, a subtle alarm began to toll, warning me that not everything was as it seemed. Later that evening, as the golden hues of sunset illuminated the sky, I found myself strolling home along a familiar path. My mind was a tangle of recollections and unsaid worries. I recalled our many moments of laughing, the late-night confessions, the pledges we had made to one another. But suddenly, every beloved memory felt polluted by the harsh taste of treachery. The wind seemed colder than normal, each gust a warning that even the warmest relationships may be severed. It wasn't long until the truth pressed itself into my consciousness. A mutual friend, who had seen something I couldn't ignore, whispered to me that Lily had been confiding in Jake about things that hinted at a secret scheme. Slowly, I began to piece together the fragments. A delicate exchange of glances, a text message left unanswered, and those furtive smiles that were way too prepared. The truth hit me like a sledgehammer. Lily, the friend I had trusted with my deepest secrets, and Jake, the one I had assumed was my safe haven, had plotted to betray me. I still recall the precise moment. I knew for sure. I had been alone in my apartment, a little space filled with thoughts of happier times, when I noticed a series of texts on Jake's phone. They weren't blatantly explicit, but the implications were unmistakable. Each text was a blade, methodically hacking through the last remains of my trust. I sat on the chilly kitchen floor, the buzz of the refrigerator the only sound accompanying my anguish, and I felt as if the entire world had crumbled around me. The shock and disbelief were tremendous, and I could feel my heart hammering in my ears as if it were attempting to escape the crushing weight of betrayal. The vivid hues of the room diminished, and every sound became muffled, as though I were caught inside a bubble of misery. In that instant, the sorrow was so vivid, so deep, that it morphed into a distinct physical achy, a gnawing sensation in my stomach and a heaviness in my chest that would not stop. For a long period, I sat there, holding the evidence of their lie, trying frantically to make sense of it all. How could two individuals I loved, two beings I had entrusted with my weaknesses, turn against me so callously? The wrath welled up inside me like a dark flood, combining with a deep despair that threatened to engulf me. Yet, even in that storm of emotions, a quiet resolution began to grow. I recognized that while their betrayal could scar my heart, it would not define me. The following day, I vowed that I would not allow this deceit ruin my sense of self-worth. I needed to tackle the reality of the situation head-on, not as a victim, but as someone restoring her dignity. I began by setting minor boundaries, refusing to answer calls or messages from Jake and Lily, allowing myself the room to digest the anguish before it might overwhelm me more. In the calm privacy of my room, I practiced affirmations, my voice shaking at first but growing steadier with each repetition. I am strong. I am worthy. I deserve honesty and affection. But the internal struggle was only half the battle. I knew that ultimately, I would have to face them, to demand answers and hold them accountable for the deception that had upended my life. With a mix of anxiety and determination, I readied myself for the confrontation that loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon. I rehearsed what I might say over and over in my mind, each time imagining a version of myself that was calm, clear, and firm. I wanted to make sure that when I spoke, every word would bear the weight of my truth. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than I had anticipated. I invited Jake and Lily to meet me at our favorite park, a site that had previously been the scene for joyful picnics, hidden confessions, and the quiet solace of shared stillness. Now, that park would bore witness to the disintegration of a once sacred tie. The park was bathed in a chilly mist as I approached the big oak tree where we had spent endless hours together, its branches extending out like mute sentinels to my agony. My pulse hammered when I spied them waiting beneath the tree, their looks unreadable. For a minute, the world seemed to hold its breath. I could see the hesitancy in Jake's gaze, the defensiveness in Lily's posture. Their once familiar faces now carried the markings of guilt and concern, and I understood that the time for trivial excuses was past. "Jake, Lily," I began, my voice firm but tinged with a tremble of controlled grief. "We need to talk." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations and destroyed trust. They exchanged a short, apprehensive gaze before Jake stepped forward. "Sarah, we can explain," he mumbled, his eyes sliding away as if he were attempting to hide behind his own embarrassment. But I wasn't interested in vague reasons or half-hearted denials. I needed the truth, naked and unedited. "Explain what?" I demanded, my voice rising in intensity as the grief boiled to the surface. "Explain how my best friend and my boyfriend could conspire behind my back." I could feel the wrath seething, a controlled fire that had been fueled by months of denial and betrayal. Every statement felt like a razor slashing into the vestiges of our history, yet I fought to let them see my frailty. For a minute, quiet reigned. Lily's eyes tightened as she crossed her arms defensively. "You're overreacting, Sarah," she replied coolly, her tone dismissive yet edged with uncertainty. But disregarding my instincts was not an option. I needed accountability. "You call this overreacting?" I shot back, my voice shaking with real emotion. "You call betraying my trust and shattering our friendship overreacting?" The words flowed out in a torrent, propelled by months of pent-up hurt and a craving for the honesty that had been robbed from me. Jake's face grew ashen, his gaze sinking to the ground as if the weight of his actions was too awful to see mine. "It wasn't supposed to hurt you like this," he whispered, almost inaudibly, as if apologizing to himself more than to me. His remarks did little to soothe the sting of betrayal. They merely proved the depth of the deception. I took a step forward, each stride deliberate, as I moved closer to the truth. "How could you both?" I whispered, the inquiry not just for them but for myself as well. I remembered the innumerable signals I had ignored, the unpleasant gut feelings, the tiny shifts in behavior that I had explained away. Now, standing in the heart of this conflict, every missed red flag seared with the intensity of hindsight. The park surrounding us appeared to fade into the background as I focused completely on the two people who had previously meant the world to me. Memories of shared laughter and whispered secrets rushed before my eyes, now tainted by the revelation of their betrayal. Each recollection was a bitter reminder of the trust that had been so freely offered and so recklessly broken. "I trusted you," I continued, my voice firm despite the storm boiling within me. "I trusted you with my heart, with every secret and dream I ever shared. And you, both of you, turned that trust into a weapon against me." My eyes glistened with unshed tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not now. I needed to remain composed, to recapture the control that had been so callously stolen away. For a long, agonizing minute, neither Jake nor Lily spoke. Their quiet was more damning than any words could have been, and it allowed the severity of my remarks to settle over us all. I could see in their eyes the dawning knowledge that nothing they said could restore the damage. Every whispered apology, every evasive glance, each was a witness to the treason that now lay naked between us. I took a deep breath, gathering power from the resolve that had been slowly developing inside me since that fateful day. "This isn't just about what you did," I continued, my voice softening for barely a second before hardening again with conviction. "It's about what you've taken from me: trust, my sense of security, the very foundation of who I am." In that moment, I made a solemn vow to myself: I would not let your lies to dictate the rest of my life. The intensity in my eyes appeared to break them from their stupor. I said, "I have spent so long trying to ignore the signs, convincing myself that love could fix anything. But love isn't enough when it's built on deception. I am done being your pawn, your scapegoat for your selfish games." The words rang over the calm park, each syllable a declaration of freedom from the smothering embrace of betrayal. It was then that something altered. Jake's voice, which had been soft and unsure, got a bit louder as he sought to rationalize his actions. "Sarah, we did it for reasons you wouldn't understand," he began, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't," I answered sternly. "There's nothing you can say to undo what's been done. I don't need explanations, I need accountability. I need you to realize the extent of the hurt you've caused." My pulse raced with every word, the cadence of my speech indicating the beginning of a path towards regaining what was my dignity, my self-respect. Lily squirmed uneasily alongside him, her eyes bouncing between Jake and me, as if silently praying for an escape from the truth. "Sarah, maybe you're just too sensitive," she said, but there was a quiver in her voice, a hesitancy that revealed her confidence. "Sensitive?" I repeated, incredulously. "Is it so wrong to expect honesty from those I call my friends? To want nothing more than the truth, even if it hurts?" I waited, letting the stillness stretch out before me as I absorbed the weight of our shared pasta history that now felt irreversibly fragmented. My thoughts rushed back to the innumerable times when I had listened to my own intuition, only to reject it as paranoia. I remembered the tiny signals, the way Lily would avoid meeting my eyes when Jake mentioned plans without me, the furtive glances exchanged between them over coffee, the small nuances that, in hindsight, screamed of lying. And now, every piece of evidence merged into a single, unassailable truth. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I whispered gently, the truth tasting bitter on my tongue. "Not just because of what you did today, but because of every little lie that led up to it." My voice faltered, and for a little minute, I allowed the tears to well up. But I hastily wiped tears away. This was not the time for weakness. The chat, as difficult as it was, served as a spark. As I walked away from that park later that day, every step felt like an act of emancipation. I had spoken my truth, and even though the wounds were deep, I felt I was beginning to reclaim the fragments of my shattered self. In the distance, I could almost see the weight of your betrayal falling into the earth, leaving behind only the vestiges of a trust that could never be totally repaired. That night, as I sat alone in the dark light of my room, I replayed the confrontation over and over in my head. I observed every move, every accent of their speech. I allowed myself to feel the whole spectrum of emotions: anger, grief, disappointment, each one combining with the emerging resolution to reconstruct my life from the wreckage of our past. I grasped a snapshot of happier times, a memory of who I once was, and murmured to myself, "I am more than this betrayal. I am stronger than these shattered promises." In the days that followed, I began the lengthy, arduous process of recovering. I reached out to the friends who had always been my true support, those whose presence reassured me that honesty and loyalty still existed. Their comments, soft yet forceful, served as a salve for my broken heart. "You deserve so much better than this," they would remark, and in their words, I found a resonance that fortified my determination. Every morning, I looked into the mirror and rehearsed the affirmations I had once just half believed. "I am worthy. I am strong. I am in control of my own destiny." Each assertion, repeated until it became a mantra, eventually healed the fissures in my self-esteem. I began to see that while betrayal had deprived me of some illusions, it also gave an opportunity for rebirth, a chance to rediscover who I truly was beneath the layers of misguided trust. The procedure wasn't linear. There were days when the anguish would surge abruptly, like a tidal wave crashing over me in the depths of night. In those instances, I would find peace in writing. I poured my feelings into a notebook, each page a witness to the agony and, eventually, the triumph of rediscovering my inner strength. Words became my refuge, a way to explain the unspeakable anguish and, slowly, the glimmering hope that rose from the darkness. As weeks progressed into months, I found that I was no longer defined simply by the betrayal. I had begun to repair not just my shattered trust, but also the very base of my self-worth. I engaged myself in new hobbies. Painting became an escape where vivid colors replaced the dull hues of melancholy, and lengthy walks in nature served as musings on life, loss, and rejuvenation. With every stride I took, I felt the bindings of the past loosening, replaced with the promise of a future where I was in control. Yet, even as I embraced these moments of healing, there remained a part of me that was tormented by the memory of that fateful day in the park, the day when I demanded accountability and refused to be quiet any longer. I regularly replayed that confrontation in my memory, not to dwell on the hurt, but to remind myself of the fortitude I had summoned in the face of crushing treachery. It was a turning point, a time when the shattered parts of my trust began to gather into a new, uncompromising identity. In the quiet hours of early morning, when the world slept, I would sit by my window and watch the sunrise. Each new day a silent promise that I was moving forward. The past, with all its agony and regret, remained behind me. A lesson in the cost of naive trust and the price of dishonesty. I realized that regaining trust, especially with others, would be a gradual and delicate process. But I had learned something invaluable: that trust, once shattered, could only be repaired by first trusting oneself. And so, as I stood on the threshold of this new beginning, I determined that I would never again allow someone to minimize my worth or stifle my voice. I would wear the wounds of betrayal as reminders of the lessons learned and the courage developed. I would honor my own instincts and never reject the calm cautions that flowed from within. Looking back now, I know that every moment, the lingering grin, the secretive glances, the quiet conversations had been a part of a greater tapestry of deceit that I had once believed was stitched with love. But in that beautiful tapestry, the threads of devotion and honesty had been replaced by strands of selfishness and deception. The cost was tremendous, yet from the rubble, I emerged with a newfound clarity. I was no longer the innocent girl who trusted without question. I had become a woman who realized that true strength came from facing the harshest truths and rising above them. Standing in that park, under the ancient oak that had witnessed so many of our shared memories, I had made my first steps toward recovering my life. And though the anguish of betrayal would always linger like a faint echo, I now had the commitment to let that pain alter me, to allow it fuel a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. I walked away from that day with my heart heavy but my spirit undamaged. I knew that I had lost something precious, the trust I had placed in the people I loved, but I also knew that I was gaining something far more valuable: the fortitude to define my own value, to choose my own path, and to never again allow dishonesty to steal my light. This is not just a narrative of loss, it is the beginning of a journey, a path of metamorphosis, where the wounds of betrayal are not signs of defeat but the very scars of survival. In the aftermath of shattered trust, I discovered the unshakable force of self-respect and the possibility of a new dawn. And as I continue to piece together the parts of my past, I do it with the solid certainty that I am destined for a future filled with authenticity, courage, and the unyielding resolution to never be silenced by falsehoods again. The days that followed the encounter in the park were heavy with a mix of numbing and clarity, a dichotomy that left me feeling both crushed by betrayal and strangely buoyed by the first sparks of self-determination. In the early hours of dawn, when the world was still a silent mystery, I would rise with a lingering ache in my chest. The echoes of that fatal talk, the desperate appeals, and the incriminating silences were carved into every part of my consciousness. And yet, as the sun's soothing rays crept through my window, I came to comprehend that the suffering I felt was not meant to confine me, was the raw material for my rebirth. I had carried the burden of their lies like an unbreakable weight, each memory of laughing and shared secret now a reminder of how trust could be so cruelly betrayed. In those moments of seclusion, it felt as though I was shouting in a crowded room, my cries drowned by the indifference of a world that had previously seemed so safe. But that emptiness was also the silent canvas onto which I would gradually paint my recovery. That morning, after a difficult night spent battling with memories and regrets, I made a solemn vow to myself. I would no longer let their deceit to define the person I was becoming. I understood now that true healing was not an overnight miracle, but a succession of tiny, deliberate choices, a patient process of reclaiming my own voice. I went into the shower, the warm water flowing over my skin, washing away the residue of tears and doubt. With each drip, I felt a gentle release, a tiny freeing of the past that had clung to me for far too long. As I dressed for the day, I found myself facing the mirror. In my reflection, I saw more than the scars of betrayal. I saw a spark of resilience that had been waiting to emerge. "I am enough," I said, forcing my voice to steady with conviction. That single, simple affirmation became my mantra. I began to comprehend that while the memories of dishonesty would always exist, they no longer had authority over my destiny. Eager to translate the anguish into meaning, I sought solace in the creative avenues I had long abandoned. I set up a tiny painting nook in my apartment, a spot that I filled with canvases, brushes, and a variety of hues that promised rejuvenation. The act of painting rapidly evolved into a ritual of catharsis. Each brushstroke was a defiant act against the darkness, a proclamation that I would create beauty from chaos. The vivid shades of red, blue, and gold danced over the painting as if in celebration of a newfound freedom. I lost count of time, fully engaged in the process, as if each hue was a note in the symphony of my recuperation. My recovery process was not restricted to the solitude of artistic expression. I went out to those friends who had remained steadfast, a band of kindred souls whose allegiance was a soothing balm to my broken heart. They welcomed me with warm arms and gentle words. Over mugs of herbal tea in secluded nooks of our favorite cafe, they reminded me that I was deserving of respect and honesty. "You deserve so much better," one friend told me, her eyes conveying true concern. "You're stronger than you think." Their support became the fuel that carried me ahead, infusing each day with a sense of possibilities that I had not dared to contemplate before. Yet, even amid these moments of sweet mending, the fear of betrayal would sometimes come in unbidden. There were days when the specter of Jake and Lily's duplicity would cast a lengthy shadow over my freshly regained confidence. In such moments, I found myself pacing in the silence of my room, the recollections of that horrible park confrontation echoing in my head. I would replay their voices, Jake's stuttered apologies and Lily's pretended indifference, until the sting of their words had faded into a faint ache. Slowly, I learned to acknowledge these instances without allowing them disrupt my development. I allowed myself to feel the anguish, to mourn the loss of a trust once offered freely. And then I channeled that sadness into determination. One cool fall afternoon, while walking down a tree-lined route in a local park, I noticed that I had begun to see the world through fresh eyes. The once familiar sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant laughter of children, now bore a deeper resonance. Each step on the twisting trail was a reaffirmation of my autonomy. I was no longer bound by the ghosts of past betrayals. I was stepping into a future that I would create on my own terms. But not every day was easy. There were evenings when the silence of my apartment seemed to mock my attempts at rehabilitation. In those dark hours, memories would flood like storm-driven waves. I recalled the delicate looks between Jake and Lily, the quiet murmurs that I had earlier disregarded as innocent conversation. I would lie awake, pondering how I had failed to spot the warning flags that had been so clear in hindsight. Why didn't I trust my instincts? I would ask myself, the question ringing in the emptiness. These times of self-reproach were terrible, yet I began to understand that they were part of the process and necessary confrontation with the past to release myself for the future. Determined to break away from the cycle of self-doubt, I resorted to mindfulness and meditation. Each morning, I would sit quietly on my balcony, letting the early sunlight to warm my face as I practiced deep, regulated breathing. I focused on the present moment, letting go of the cares of yesterday. The exercise was simple yet profound, a reminder that every breath was an opportunity to start afresh. With time, I learned to listen to the quiet whispers of my inner self, to trust the gentle direction that had formerly been drowned out by the noise of betrayal. This inner work began to radiate outward. I started to explore new things, not as distractions but as genuine expressions of my renewed self. I joined a hiking group, where the fellowship of strangers united by a love for environment offered fresh ideas on resilience. Climbing steep routes and achieving heights became a metaphor for my inner journey, each step upward a victory against the gravity of despair. The physical exertion was tough, yet every time I reached the summit and looked out over a sweeping vista, I felt a sense of triumph. The world, with all its shortcomings, suddenly appeared overflowing with potential. Amid these events, I found Saraha lovely, effervescent presence who emanated a quiet confidence. One sunny afternoon, as I toiled with a particularly tough course, she arrived with a smile that seemed to light up even the gloomiest path. "Hey, want to join us?" she had said, her tone both warm and genuine. I agreed, and in that moment, I knew that new friendships might be formed on the solid ground of shared experiences and mutual respect. With Sarah and the others, I began to construct a social circle that was based on trust and authenticity, a dramatic contrast to the toxic ties I had earlier experienced. Every interaction, every smile, was a step away from the past. In group outings, we would exchange stories and laughter that reminded me how precious human connection could be when it was free from deception. I realized that laughter, when sincere, had the potential to heal even the deepest wounds. Slowly, the heavy mantle of betrayal began to lift, replaced by the warmth of genuine company. Despite these positive developments, traces of the past nevertheless lingered like obstinate stains. I found myself intermittently plagued by the phantom of Jake's voice, a cold, contemptuous tone that had once struck me with dread. In one clear memory, I recalled an accidental encounter at a coffee shop. I had noticed him sitting alone, and for a little moment, I paused. The sight of him provoked a maelstrom of emotions, rage, grief, and even a feeling of regret. But as I passed past, I steeled myself with the notion that I was no longer defined by his acts. I am done with you, I had thought, a quiet pledge resonating in my thoughts. That day represented a turning point, a clear separation between the person I was and the person I hoped to become. In the quiet hours of my rehabilitation, I committed long evenings to writing in my journal. I poured my heart out into the pages, every uncertainty, every triumph, every moment of weakness exposed bare in pen. Those pages were a hallowed zone where I could confront the whole spectrum of my feelings without judgment. They hurt me, I would write, but they also forced me to find my inner strength. With each writing, I began to identify patterns in my sorrow and learned critical lessons about the need of self-respect and healthy limits. Writing, in its raw honesty, developed into both a mirror and a blueprint for my healing journey. Time, as it always does, began to work its subtle spell. The severe sting of betrayal gradually lessened, not through oblivion but through a deliberate process of acceptance and growth. I started to perceive the past as a series of lessons rather than a series of scars. Every red sign, every moment of denial, became a reminder of the lessons I had learned about trust and self-worth. I knew that the anguish I had experienced was not a measure of failure, but a tribute to the depth of my capacity to feel and to overcome. One clear winter day, when the landscape was blanketed in pristine snow, I decided to explore the park where everything had come crashing down. Standing beneath that same great tree, now powdered with a fine layer of frost, I felt an unusual peace. The tree, weathered by countless seasons yet still strong and steadfast, mirrored the metamorphosis I was enduring. I sat on a familiar bench, closed my eyes, and allowed the fresh air to fill my lungs. In that peaceful moment, I understood that while the anguish of betrayal will always be a part of my history, it no longer held the power to control my future. I had recovered my narrative own of strength, authenticity, and unflinching self-respect. As spring began to unfurl its gentle greens and sweet blooms, I embraced fresh beginnings with wide arms. I enrolled in a creative writing course at a local community center, anxious to polish my art and share my tale with others who might be navigating similar storms. In that supportive environment, I learned that vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength, a way to connect with others on a profound level. The act of sharing my experiences, listening to the stories of individuals who had also endured betrayal, and watching the courage of others was both humbling and inspiring. I no longer felt solitary in my pain. I was part of a group that knew the transforming power of conquering hardship. With every day that passed, the parts of my former self began to merge into a new identity, one forged by the fires of heartache yet tempered by the cool waters of self-discovery. I found myself laughing more freely, not out of a desperate need to erase the past, but because I had finally learned to trust the present. I began to explore my passions with renewed vigor, joining a book club where lively debates over literature ignited my imagination, volunteering at a local shelter where the gratitude of others reminded me that love still existed in abundance, and even taking up yoga as a means to balance the body and mind. Each of these initiatives added to the mosaic of my rehabilitation, giving color and richness to a life formerly overwhelmed by gloom. There were still occasions, however, when the memories would come uninvited: an unexpected song on the radio, a familiar perfume, or the sight of two people laughing too closely together. In those moments, I learned to halt, to breathe deeply, and to remind myself that the past was no longer a prison. I had the power to acknowledge the grief, let it wash over me like a fleeting storm, and then step back into the sunlight of my own making. My journey was far from linear. It was a tapestry created from strands of both pain and success. Yet, with every passing day, I realized that the tapestry was becoming richer, more detailed, and unquestionably beautiful. One evening, after a particularly long day filled with both challenges and minor wins, I sat down to reflect on how far I had come. I opened my journal and read back some of the entries that once took me to tears. I saw the raw agony, the uncertainty, and the self-doubt that had once overwhelmed me. And then, as I reached the more recent pages, I saw statements of self-empowerment and gratitude, proof that I had not only survived but was now thriving. "I am enough," I read out gently, feeling the power of that simple word's echo in my soul. It was no longer a desperate appeal or a fleeting hope, it was an undeniable truth that I had worked hard to claim. In the months that followed, I had opportunities to put my newfound strength to the test. There were painful conversations with family members who had formerly rejected my worries, occasions when I had to stay firm in my limits against pressure to regress to old behaviors. Each time, I remembered myself of the day beneath that great oak, when I had spoken my truth with a voice that was shaking yet resolute. I recalled the hard, steady look in my own eyes, the look of someone who had been through the worst and had emerged out the other side, not unscarred, but definitely stronger. I also realized that when I acknowledged my own worth, my relationships began to transform. I naturally drew toward individuals who valued honesty and integrity, and I grew more discriminating about who was permitted into my inner group. I found that real friendship was built on mutual respect, trust, and the courage to confront life's hardships together, qualities that I had once taken for granted. With each genuine connection, I felt the wounds of betrayal healing a little more, replaced with the warmth of ties that honored my authentic self. By the time summer arrived, I had reshaped my inner landscape completely. The echoes of the past still whispered on quiet nights, but they were now joined by the soft hum of hope and rejuvenation. I had learned to use my grief as a catalyst for progress, turning each struggle into an opportunity to unearth the strength within me. I had emerged from the darkness, not spotless, but wiser and more durable. The betrayal that previously threatened to define my existence had, in time, become a stepping stone toward the life I was committed to construct. Standing at the edge of a bright field one late afternoon, I closed my eyes and felt the smooth, cold grass under my feet. I could sense the promise of a fresh day in the delicate rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. In that moment of perfect silence, I understood that I was no longer the person who had been crushed by lying. I was a warrior, scarred yet unbowed, vulnerable yet fiercely alive. I said to the breeze, "I am free." Looking back now, the journey from betrayal to empowerment feels like a long, twisting road on that was riddled with potholes, doubts, and moments of raw vulnerability. But it is also a route paved with courage, surprising generosity, and the unwavering will to restore every piece of my broken identity. I learned that healing is not about deleting the past. It is about accepting it, learning from it, and using it to construct a future that is genuinely mine. As I continue to move on, I take with me the lessons of those hard days. I have come to understand that trust, once damaged, is not something to be discarded totally. It is something to be rebuilt carefully, with care and judgment. And I have learned that the greatest act of resistance in the face of betrayal is not revenge, but the calm, persistent resolve to leading a life that recognizes one's own worth. Today, when I sit down at my painting desk with a cup of herbal tea steaming by my side, I experience an overwhelming sense of thankfulness. I am glad for the love I have discovered in unexpected places, for the strength that arose from my vulnerability, and for the truth that has set me free. The scars of yesterday no longer hold me down. Instead, they tell me that I have overcome, that I have risen from the ashes of deceit, and that I now tread a path lit by the brilliance of my own tenacity. And so, as the pages of my tale continue to turn, I choose to see every new day as an opportunity to construct a life of authenticity, courage, and unrelenting hope. I am no longer defined by the treachery that once nearly broke me. I am defined by the fierce resolve to create, to love, and to trust again in my own terms. With every breath, every stride, and every stroke of the brush, I continue to tell a story that is uniquely mine, a story of rising from the ashes and embracing the dazzling promise of a life reborn.